I know we're competing with the #1 head note of the whole session, so very grateful you're here. I know this is going to be an awesome session, especially with Amazon being our main sponsor for the event. So appreciate you being here. Please say hello to your neighbor. I hope you learn a lot from these folks on stage. But I'm very happy to introduce you your session on innovating and elevating with AWS. So take it away. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks. Hey, it's on. My name's Eric Arnoldi. I work for AWS. I am a solutions architect there, which means I get to geek out on some of the really cool technical stuff. However, I always love conversations with where does the technology go? What does the business do with the underlying technology stack? And so we've got some awesome people. Again, my name is Eric Arnoldi. If you're looking for Eric Schmidt, you are in the wrong spot. So I will pass the mic over to Jacody.
Perfect. Yeah, Eric Schmidt's not here. It's not a Google conversation, it's AWS, but that's just a joke. Love those guys too. Love them all. Jacody James, I'm a sales leader within Amazon. I get to work with startups every day for the last couple of years, and I'm a former founder as well, a future founder as well. So it all kind of blends together. I'm excited to be here, excited to have a conversation with some of my colleagues here and let you guys learn a little bit about what we do.
Sorry. Jacody, I want to add one other thing to your intro, and Micah and Samuel, for fun. Thinking back to the beginning of your career, tell us about a new technology that that dramatically improved your work. And I'll go because I didn't go, but DSL, like a DSL line was game-changing. I went from 56K modem to 640 kilobits. And I thought I was there. I'm 1,000 times faster, and I still have complaints right now, but like 640, that was my early technology.
It's a good question. And I find this very interesting for me, but it was Facebook. And I'm not a social media person. I kind of almost despise social media. But at the beginning of my career, I went to the School of Mines, and we were selected to be a part of some of the initial Facebook groups. And so it was a great way to kind of connect with friends. And then maybe a couple years after, I was like, I'm not doing social media ever again. But it was really formative at the early stages.
Well, it's great to be here. My name is Micah Koch. I'm a partner with Blackhorn Ventures. Blackhorn is a seed and Series A stage fund that invests in founders who are transforming how we build, power, and move our world. So we just closed our third fund at $155 million. So we are actively deploying capital. We do have a number of investments here in Colorado, but also globally. And we get really excited about what's happening around decarbonization, what's happening around workforce productivity, resource efficiency. We just think it's an exceptionally exciting time to be investing in the energy transition. And I've been doing that for a while. I started my career as a founder putting games on phones. I put the first game on AT&T's data network in 1999. And the thing that has dramatically improved my work, man, that's a tough one. Like a number of things. To your point, like network connectivity. I was thinking like 5G. Speeds are a whole lot faster. But I'm gonna go with like CRM tools. So we use Affinity. It just makes organizing information and conversations and touch points just really easy and straightforward, and it's a way to kind of have a nice through line with some of the longer term relationships that we have with founders and LPs.
Hi everyone. Oh, hot. My name is Samuel Hauser. I am the program manager at Access Mode. We are a pre-seed tech-focused accelerator, helping any founder who is traditionally furthest from opportunity kind of go from ideation to very first MVP. My background is actually in engineering. That's kind of where I got my start. So I kind of like to say sometimes I'm a former engineer turned ski instructor. Spent a little stint in healthcare as well during the pandemic before eventually settling on startups, VC, accelerators, et cetera. But from a tech perspective, I mean, back in my engineering days, I know Jira for some people now is really old, but especially for aviation and defense, it was a game changer for us. Like truly saved us months off of year-long contracts, traditionally millions and billions of dollars. But maybe to be a little more fun, during my days as a ski instructor, giving feedback for my students to kind of take away, like, hey, what were some things that I can be working on in my skiing, even though like our time together is ending? And I don't know if any of you are skiers or remember the Epic Mix app that like Vail Resorts came out with. Super simple, but it made my job way easier to like get feedback to my students, and it was in our eyes like a resounding success.
Love it. So today we want to pull the curtain back on what we don't see. So we've got VC, we've got Accelerator, and we've got Amazon. So what's the common thing here? Early on and at surface, you might see Amazon as a vendor, provide technology provider. You might see VC as somebody that's just going to provide capital, but we want to dive deeper than that. And so, Jacody, my first question is, what does it look like when you have that first conversation with a customer? What are their blind spots when it comes to what AWS can offer beyond the tech stack that really benefits them?
Yeah, it's always interesting, right? So I've had the pleasure of working with thousands of startups over the past couple of years. And usually the first question always is, how much money can Amazon give me? And so I say, how much do you want? I can't give it to you though. But it's always a great conversation. And when you pull back the onion and you say, hey, really, what is Amazon, right? The way I think of Amazon is the world's largest startup, right? And if you hear a lot of the information that's going on in the news right now, it's about us reorganizing to be the world's largest startup again. We believe in operating in very small teams. So when I think about founders coming to me and having a conversation, I think about two stats that are pretty interesting. 80+% of unicorns are on AWS. 92% of AI and ML startups that are unicorns are on AWS. So what does that mean? It means that we help them actually grow, not just giving them the same technology, right? And so the conversations I love to have with founders is around, okay, great. I get you need money. I needed money too, and I'll need money in the future as well. But what's your next milestone that you actually want to hit, and how can we help you accelerate that, right? Think about the millions of customers that we have. Think about Amazon is actually a collection of about 100, 150 companies. It's not just one company. From Whole Foods to AWS to Twitch to all these different brands, right? How can I get you in contact with some of these awesome leaders and people that know these industries? Amazon is probably the home of probably 5,000 to 10,000 former founders as well. Right, and so we know a little bit about something. I just have to get you to the right person, right? And so that's what I hope when founders come. I try to transition the conversation away from, hey, how can I get you the best technology, or how can I get you money, to what can I help you do to actually formulate your idea better, get a little bit more sticky, and help you actually grow or meet your next milestone, whatever that is. So whether you're going from prototype to MVP to actually scaling to growth, whatever that part of the journey is, we have people that have went through it, and our credibility is in the stats, right? So having 80+% of unicorns is definitely a statistic that we're very proud of. No one else can say that.
Thank you. What gets in the way of what you really want to offer customers? So like you get on that call, you know, we're going to go later today up to Boulder. We're going to sit down with some founders. You're really good at pulling back the yes, and then you ask that next question. You go one level deeper. What's the thing that essentially stops the conversation? Where can we like, hey, I'd love to do so much more with you. And how do you get somebody to go from vendor concept to, all right, you just told me you have, this many founders working for you. That's not me. What do you say to get them over the edge? What's the thing that people really bite on?
Yeah, one of the hard part of being in sales is I have to do something for you to trust me first, right? And so the first thing is I try to find something very small that I can go and deliver immediately. And I think about that same concept when I was a founder as well, right? Is how can I give you value for free, essentially up front? That way I can earn a little bit of trust from you so I can actually get behind the curtains to understand a little bit more, right? A lot of founders don't share their pitch deck with us, right? I would love to read your pitch deck because that gets me more and more excited about where I'm going to spend time, right? I have to choose between thousands of startups and where I spend my time. My VC partners have to do the same thing, right? So if you want me to invest in you, give me a little bit more information so I can learn a little bit more about you so I can get excited. Because if I'm going to invest my time, that's just like me investing my money at the same time. And so I will then be a cheerleader for you. And so that's how we kind of break through some of those first discussions of, hey, I need this. Okay, I'm gonna give you that really quick. Here's how you go do it. But then can we actually have a conversation about where you're trying to go? And I find those conversations really fruitful for two reasons. One is I find out if they're actually serious and they're gonna do anything. And two, we figure out if it's worth my time. Because my time is still valuable even though I'm in the position I'm in.
So, Micah, when someone's made the decision to get around, and you get that first introduction, what are you most surprised about when chatting with them and learning about the startup? Like, they'll start telling you all the things and everything, and what sticks out for you when they're having that conversation initially?
I think everyone probably approaches that question through their own biases and lens and experience. Generally, I think the thing that I focus on more than anything is really like go-to-market and your market size. And so, look, good ideas are a dime a dozen. And businesses are really about execution, right? Can you ultimately build something, not only that solves a real customer problem, but really think through the right distribution channel for how your customer is actually going to use your product, your solution, or what have you. And I think a lot of founders generally don't think through the go-to-market so much. And that's where things either fall apart or they get really, really interesting. But understanding, for example, your channel economics, if in fact you're going to work with a distributor, that has a cost to it. And if that cost is 5%, it's going to mean that your market is, X big. If that cost is 30% and you're on the Apple App Store, for example, then it's going to mean your market is Y big, right? So I think that understanding ultimately how your customer actually acquires new solutions tends to be something that a lot of early stage founders don't think through, right? It's a lot of technology push. It's a lot of my baby isn't ugly, without deeply understanding how your customer actually buys and what that whole ecosystem looks like. Is anyone familiar with I-Core? Has anyone ever done any I-Core program? There's a really great program that you should look into. National Science Foundation launched this thing called NSF I-Core for federally funded research about 13 years ago. And premise is that you are essentially taught how to use a business model canvas. And over the course of 7 weeks, you're given $50,000 if you have lineage that comes from NSF or other federal research labs. And you do 100 customer interviews over the course of 7 weeks. It's more or less 15 interviews per week. And what you're really trying to understand is whether or not you can prove or disprove some core hypotheses about your business, how your customer actually, again, your channels, your revenue streams, your cost structures, your value propositions, all of those things. But that idea of very hypothesis-driven understanding to get inside your customer mindset and their behavior is, I think, something that a lot of early stage founders neglect to their detriment, because the two main reasons why companies fail is because they run out of cash or they build something that customers don't need. And so that process of okay, it's 7 weeks can save people years and years of effort. And then just, very quickly on market size, I think that's another one where I think the default is to be lazy, which is to say Googling how big the market is and looking at, some industry report and saying, oh, if I only get 5% of this market, then, my business is going to be worth X, or my revenue is going to be worth X if I can only get 1%, right? And that math never works. It just does not work. And it shows, again, you don't really understand your market. So I think the key, what I'm really looking for in terms of that sophisticated or nuanced approach to market size is, again, it can be top down or it can be bottoms up, but a little bit more of a nuanced approach to really not only understanding what your TAM is, what your total addressable market is, but really how much you can eat over the next 18 to 24 months. And is that realistic? And have you pressure tested that? Are those hypotheses real? Have you actually been, not that it has to be right, it doesn't have to be right, but you have to show some thoughtfulness about how you're going to get there to actually drive a big enough opportunity for us in this case, which is venture scale.
Awesome. So Samuel, we've heard go-to-market support is a challenge, and some of the basic blocking and tackling. Where does Access Mode fit? What does Access Mode offer as far as support in those areas?
Yeah, I love what I'm hearing here, because this is very affirming for some of the ways that I think about how I do my programming. So I get 15 weeks per cohort. That sounds like a lot. It's not a lot from my perspective. And I actually like to say that I'm bringing in go-to-market even before our program starts. So when I do deep dive interviews into founders and companies that have been accepted to our program, I'm assigning them pre-work 3 weeks before program starts, and usually it goes in the form of how many customers have you talked to thus far, and most of the time it's little to none. And so I say, hey, you need to go out there and do that. And I'll give them a little bit of instruction, right? There's a little bit of I want you to try and fail and experiment on your own, and once we come to the program, we'll work on that. I split the 15 weeks into 3 different phases. And so in the first phase, we're doing a lot of understanding what problem are you solving, and can you communicate it clearly to other people, investors if you want to, sales in another regard, right, to your customers. And we also think a little bit about market landscape, so competitive analysis, maybe a little bit of business model canvas, we'll do that as well. But really trying to think about okay, what kind of business are you trying to make in the long run? And admittedly, we're still really early compared to a lot of what you have heard from these other 2 gentlemen up here. We're not quite there, but my goal is to build the foundation such that 2 or 3 steps down the road, when these founders get to, people like those sitting to my right here, that they are prepared to have those conversations. A big part of phase 2 for us is building your very first MVP. And so you can think of how go-to-market strategy is really important when you're talking to your developers, right? Which features do we choose to build on very limited resources, right? I'm really focusing and honing in with my founders, hey, you might want to do 10 different features, but for the MVP and the resources you have, you can't afford 10. So how do we know which ones to pick? What's your competitive advantage? What's your competitive differentiation that ties into your go-to-market strategy in terms of how am I going to survive as a business? What am I doing that my customers or competitors, don't see anywhere else, right? And then finally, the last third is a really quick crash course in sales and marketing and growth hacking and things like that. And ultimately, I don't get a ton of time to do that. I'm covering so many other bases, but thankfully, I have really good partners, in Amazon and other VCs and other accelerators who can really help me fill in those gaps even post-program. So once I send these companies away with an MVP, right, I can do post-program programming, which I'll do bi-monthly, that's really focused on our alumni. So after the program, I did a B2B sales workshop earlier, and I'm doing another market validation workshop in October. Right, so we still continue to help our companies afterwards, but there is a lot in terms of Eric came in and talked to my founders about AWS and the tech stack, right? And especially when they're doing product development, that is incredibly insightful for them to be able to say, hey, it actually makes sense for my business and what I'm building to build it on AWS, or it could be something else too, right? But to be able to make those effective decisions with the right information at that point, such that when these really more important conversations happen, they're a lot more prepared.
I want to add something to what Michael was saying. I think about a framework, right? Especially when I'm talking a lot of early stage, and when I'm coming up with ideas. I tend, my girlfriend's here, and I come up with a lot of ideas all the time, right? And some of those ideas, like you said, is a dime a dozen, right? All the time. And so I have this framework in my mind of how I work out whether my idea is good or bad, right? And it follows these 4 things. Is it the right problem, right people, right time, right solution, right? And if you kind of dive into those a little bit, right, it's like, is it solving a specific problem that someone actually wants to solve? Who's the right person that wants that problem actually solved? What would show you that they actually want to solve it, because they probably paid to solve it or they're looking to go solve it somewhere? What's the right time, right? This is one that I think we get wrong sometime a lot, but the right time is when does it create urgency to actually go do something about it, right? And then who are those early buyers? So usually you're going to be on that, if you think about the whole kind of curve, right? Your early adopters, early innovators is where you're trying to go to, right? What's the signal for them that they're actually going to buy it? And then it's go build out a solution. Because I'm not technical, I don't build anymore, I never did. I hated programming, coding. That's why I have my colleagues that will do the coding. But if I can't figure out the first 3 around the right problem, the right people, the right time, it's very hard for me to figure out the go-to-market. It's very hard for me to figure out the TAM, because the TAM really follows that cycle, right? If there's only 1,000 doctors that do X, Y, Z, that's your TAM, unfortunately. And if those doctors have to be working 80 hours a week before they would want your solution, then how many doctors are working 80 hours a week? Now it's down to 100. Now that is the core of who you can actually go after at that point, and that's how you can express it. That's the way I like to have very, very practical discussions about actually driving sales, driving revenue into a company.
Thanks for that. And Samuel, I want to do a quick shout out. Regis actually came by the booth yesterday, the AWS booth upstairs. Regis is an Access Mode alum, and he showed me the app that he's got now. And he had 2 questions for me. And the first one was, how can I lower my AWS bill? Great question. Yes, I will help you with that. That is my job. That is what I do. We have frameworks for that. We have cost optimization. The second one, how can I get into the marketplace? And the broader question was, how can I help you scale? And I said, thank you so much for asking that question. That's why we are here. Scaling is not just a technical problem, it's a business problem. And so that's what we're here for. And so I'm gonna ask a quick question of the audience. If you're deployed on AWS, how many of you know your account manager? Anybody? Bueller? 1. Yes. Awesome. Jacody, how do we find out who our account manager is so that we can be like, hey, I need help with scaling or go-to-market support?
That's a good question. Do I even know the answer? No, I do know the answer. It's just a joke. I mean, the best way to find your account manager is fairly simple. Just submit a support ticket and tell someone, hey, I need to know who my account manager is. Because those relationships are what will drive us internally to go and actually do something about whatever problems or challenges that you're having. So it's really awesome that you know who your account manager is. But you need that hero internally to some of these larger organizations and smaller organizations to really go drive traction with them. Just knowing their names or having them connected on LinkedIn doesn't really drive anything.
Mike, I was recently at a dinner sitting next to a VC, and I was like, well, what are your challenges? And their answer was, a lot of times when customers come to you, they don't realize that you have to go do fundraising as well. How can startups come to you and make your job easier in that process?
I don't think a startup's job is to make a VC's job easier, to be very honest with you. Like, yeah, we have to raise money, and it is hard. And, the Fed cut interest rates yesterday, great. Hopefully that makes things a little bit easier. But the reality is like, I've been in this game for a while, and it is very difficult to raise capital right now, whether you are a startup or you're a VC, honestly. Like, it's tough. It is tough. Like, the bar is high. The bar is very, very high for early stage companies if you are trying to raise VC capital. Now, I think honestly, like VC capital has like a halo that it probably should not have. I think a lot of founders don't understand like GP math. So in other words, like they don't understand that when we raise capital from LPs, we are on a 10-year clock. And in our case, we're trying to return like at least 3 to 5x what we've raised, over the course of that 10-year period. So, that means that there are significant growth expectations. It also means that, generally, like, unless there's a kind of realistic path to get to $100 million in revenue, it's probably not going to be able to return the fund, which is what we need to do. Like, we need things that are going to return the fund as part of our fiduciary responsibility to our investors, who are pension funds and foundations, like people who you want to be able to be wealthy. Look, the reason why I love this is because I fundamentally believe that, like, at the early stage, that is when investing is most pure. If you're a Series C or Series D company, I don't want to say it's easy to allocate capital to those opportunities, but you have a whole lot more signal than you do at like pre-seed or seed or even Series A, where like you're basically betting on the founder and the market for the most part, because the product's probably going to change, pricing model's going to change, all those things are probably going to change, except for arguably the team, right? And maybe the market. But I also think that there are like these handful of like crucible moments that each founder goes through. And there's only a small number of them. And, we were talking about this earlier, but like, look, I think the investors that you want to associate with are people who you can turn to, who should be your first call. If things start going bad with your co-founder, or if you have a first customer who loves what you're doing so much that they want to double their order size, or you have a big question about what the next generation of the product does, or whatever the case may be. And I think there are really good early stage investors who will be there for founders, like in the trenches with you in that journey. Helping you with business development and customer introductions, helping you with talent, right? Building out the team, helping you build your syndicate for your next round or your current round of financing. But those investors are generally pretty few and far between. And so again, like, I think a very common mistake is like entrepreneurs will not do their homework on investors. Investors will always generally do their homework on the entrepreneur. But it really should be flipped, so that you are doing reference checks, you're talking to other founders within the portfolio. Like, it's almost like you're getting married to somebody. And you wouldn't get married to someone, unless you're on one of those reality shows, like on the first date, Like, you want to understand what someone's bringing to the table. And again, like, the right investor is truly going to be a partner for you, and is going to bring things that are arguably more valuable than cash, right? Like, we've had instances of, this just happened recently, where like we put $500,000 to work in a company and wound up connecting them with a customer who just signed like an $11.5 million deal. So that far outweighs the amount of capital that we put to work. But those are the kinds of investor relationships that you should be cultivating as a founder, and it's kind of on you to do so, because those investors generally are not going to come to you.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, and Sam as well, this idea that when somebody comes and they said, here's our deck, and yes, we're going to be, we're going to do 100 million because we're going to do this, and this. What's your first response to them when they have to have a number against all those things just to get to the 100 million?
Yeah. Well, I'll just start very quickly. So the analogy that I actually love to use is the Amazon analogy. So when Jeff Bezos started Amazon, right, what did he sell? books. Actually, it was even more niche than that. If you go back, he actually sold rare out-of-print books. And that was his beachhead. And it was only by selling books in the beginning that now Amazon sells everything under the sun, including, obviously, data center space. But like, had he not been able to tackle that beachhead and dominate that, there's absolutely no way that he could have gone to, those other markets. And so, yes, I think to your point, like, at the early stage, and I would say, generally speaking, like this is kind of through Series A, you really want to be like hyper-focused on just solving one problem for one very specific niche set of customers, as opposed to boiling the ocean, right? Like, I hate that response, like, oh, this works for everybody. It's like, yeah, fine, but like, who really cares? Like, who has the hair on fire pain point and a willingness to pay, and you understand like how the check gets written, the procurement thresholds, like all that stuff. Like, you really, really deeply need to understand that beachhead customer like the back of your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I spend the last 5 weeks, so kind of that phase 3, we're doing sales and marketing, but as an accelerator, we also have our own demo day, right? The big show and tell. We bring all of our investor partners, big people in the room, have our founders pitch in front of them, right? And hopefully good things happen. But for instance, in terms of like doing your own due diligence on investors, I am also mind blown at how few founders will actually take the time to do that. Good case in point, I spent a couple hours 2 weeks ago with one of my founders. She was like, hey, I'm trying to figure out how to start doing investor comms, right? I'm gonna start doing a quarterly update. Like, investors have been like, hey, I'm interested, but not yet. Probably some of you have heard that response multiple times, right? And so how do I craft something that's going to be compelling but also brief, because I know they don't have much time, yada, yada, you've been there. I spent some time just going through like, hey, how do we do diligence on a fund, right? Like, let's go through their website. Let's go through their portfolio. What are some tips and tricks to find the people that I need to talk to understand how do these investors think? And fun fact, she won a pitch competition a couple of weeks ago to qualify to pitch at United Way's pitch competition last night. And fun fact, she won $75,000 at that pitch competition to continue her business, and I'm so stoked for her, right? But who knows, maybe drawing an unfair correlation here, but like, do the work to understand. And also, I tell my founders all the time, right? I'm hearing the same things, right? Like, easy general rule of thumb. I'm like, do you want to be $100 million plus valued business? Like, if not, that's fine. At Access Mode, we actually focus a lot on alternative capital pathways, right? I have lending partners. I have like alternative financing-based partners that I can go to, CDFIs. If you are like, hey, you know what? A $5 million business where I get to keep 100% of the pie, I'm really happy with that. In which case, like, great. Like, I'm more than happy to support you. And in fact, the investors are gonna be like, great, that's not a deal that would have been valuable to us anyway. So like, happy to have one less email in the inbox, so to speak, right? Like an average pre-seed fund, maybe, at least I know a lot of pre-seed funds, like we'll go through like 3 to 4K deals a year, right? Like, can you imagine like trying to evaluate 3,000 to 4,000 and you're only investing in about less than 0.5% of that, right? There's a lot of deal flow fatigue that you get there. And so like being able to understand, how do these investors think? Like, what is their thesis? What is their expertise? And then how do I tailor to that? It's just like applying to a job. It's a lot of work. Everyone wonders like, why on earth do I have to do a cover letter? But like, truly, it's a great way to distinguish yourself. And so finding ways to do that even with investors, and like, that's something that I have to spend a lot of time on.
Can I just to pile on that one quick note about like quarterly comms and quarterly updates. So we have passed on and then ultimately funded a handful of companies who have been in touch with us post-pass. And like, that notion of the quarterly update is so important, even if we're not investing in a deal, but if we do, the reason is because it's a proxy for how you communicate as a founder with not only your investors, but with your team and your employees and your customers. So again, like, that point is a great one for all the founders in the audience. Like, those quarterly updates, or maybe they're monthly updates or whatever, and they're to your board and to, your rich aunt or whoever, they really matter. Like putting the time in, having a great template for doing that, like making sure that they're data driven. It's one of the best things that you can do. Even if someone passes on you, you can be like, hey, would it be okay with you if I sent you my updates? And then again, you never know, right? 6 months, 12 months later, things start to click and it's time for a coffee, blah, 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 the investor reaches out. But without that, like they don't, because again, it's a numbers game, and yeah, so it is on you as the founder to kind of keep in touch with people who you want to pitch.
I wonder if you guys can talk a little bit more about kind of your investor thesis and how you kind of select for your incubators. Well, your incubator, and then for you from a VC standpoint.
Yeah, so we are, my boss, co-founder, CEO, Zanetta Kelsey, has spent a large majority of her career in tech, and incredible Black woman. And she and her co-founder, Kevin Allen, basically looked at the market and said, hey, if we look at the top 100 tech companies in the United States right now, how many of them are a person of color, and could you name them by name? And basically said, the answer is not enough. And so she set out to make Access Mode to fill that need, basically saying our mission and vision is that great entrepreneurs and business ideas can come from anyone and anywhere. And sometimes it's a matter of opportunity and access to resources. And so I said earlier, we typically focus on any founder that is traditionally furthest from opportunity. And so we are actually a 501c3. We are a nonprofit, and we fundraise money and then invest it in a non-dilutive format. So we invest non-dilutive 20K grants into each company to help them build their MVP. And so you can think of us as a little more mission, social, impact-driven, whatever title you want to throw at it. But we're really here to say, hey, we believe in you. Here's some money. Go build an MVP. We're going to do our best to support you, and let's set you up for success. And so when you think of like MVP, pre-seed, especially a little more from like the VC standpoint, you often hear kind of the lingo of 0 to 1. The way that I actually kind of like to describe Access Mode is that when we think of who we're actually targeting, my goal is to get these folks from -1 to 0, so that when they're in these rooms at Denver Startup Week or what have you, or finally get an intro call or a session with an investor, right, that they have an equal fighting chance along with everybody else who's in the pool.
That's awesome. So we invest like across 4 big verticals that are responsible for the lion's share of emissions globally. So energy, transportation, construction and real estate, and supply chain and logistics. Those are really like large categories that have been very slow to adopt digital technology, and also have a whole lot of low-hanging fruit from a decarbonization perspective. The horizontal that we look at is like workforce productivity across those verticals. Half of our utility workers are set to retire by 2030. There's something like 2 million open jobs in construction. So really like structural issues around labor in some of our biggest industries. And regardless of what happens in November, I'm not so sure that this country changes in a major way with respect to, again, some of the workforce gaps. At the same time, you look at the growth of AI, you look at the growth of electric vehicles. We are going through a really critical point in the energy transition, and big companies like Amazon have made some significant commitments to get to net zero. Same with the state of Colorado on their path to get to, I think, about 88% emissions reduction by 2030 from the 2005 numbers. And so again, just like a huge opportunity in this shift around renewables and around building decarbonization, in some of the things that we need to do from a supply chain perspective. And so we tend to invest in things that are pretty asset light and capital efficient. So like we're not doing things in new battery chemistries or nuclear fusion, things that are going to take 15 years to commercialize and require billions of dollars. Like we leave that to Amazon Climate Pledge Fund and other folks who have billions of dollars of AUM. We are much more focused on things that can go to market quickly and really kind of bend the curve between now and 2030, which is arguably when we need to act.
I've got one other question. I do want to. We've got about 6 minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience? You've got the panelists up here. We've got people from the largest down to right here in Denver accelerators. Any questions for anybody up here? Yeah.
How do you go about finding your customers' buying behavior patterns? Because that's different for every company, and so it's not a general thing. Like if you're going like gas, you're going to do this thing. Obviously there's a user interviews, but how's that user interview specifically? Is there like a deeper way that you can go?
Well, I think that's the most critical thing, right? Like, I would argue that understanding customer behavior is going to kind of come down to like the specific job to be done and the person whose job it is to actually like get that thing done. So I don't think there's any replacement for that. Like, just to be very clear, you have to do that. That should be, we talked about like the 100 customer interviews over the course of whatever time period you set. That's where you get pattern recognition. But the trick is like, it's not just oil and gas as a hypothetical, right? It is the job title. Like maybe it's like, I don't know, head of exploration. And it's not like all of oil and gas. It'll be like tier 1 majors, or there's a ton of like very small oil and gas companies with less than $1 billion of market cap or whatever. Because again, the mindset and behavior is going to be very different based on like that customer profile if they work at Chevron or if they work for, again, a smaller, player within the value chain. So like, I think that's where you can get some of that stuff from like reading blogs or listening to conferences, etc. But I would argue like the best data and the best experiment design that you can run is by asking open-ended questions, getting people to tell you stories about their job, about, again, what their procurement process is like, how they make decisions, etc. And the really interesting thing is like, once you do that, you have a leg up on customer acquisition, right? Like, so in other words, if in fact you find that you've validated a problem set and the solution that you're building meets that problem, and you know the job title of the person who you're solving for, now you can go out and run whatever, $100 experiment on LinkedIn or Google or Amazon or whatever, targeting that person's profile, like that very specific job title profile, and see whether or not, again, like you can build a list or what have you as a proxy for demand.
100%. That plus one to that, exactly. I mean, that's really exactly what I tell my founders. Like, it's always an iterative process. I think sometimes, as builders, we like to think that like, if I could just do it once and be done, like that'd be great, and I kind of just check that off, and I can move on to the many other things that I have to do as a CEO, head of a company, right? The fact of the matter is that it's going to change all the time, but sometimes you kind of do have to like, miss the forest for the tree sometimes, right? Like this being ruthlessly specific. I tell my founders all the time, I'm such a big fan of incredibly specific solutions to incredibly specific problems. And maybe at some point you grow, you expand, and right, and that shifts and that changes and that iterates, and that's great, right? But especially when we're at the early stage, there needs to be such a focus on like, what is the problem to be solved? And by the way, the only difference between a passion project and a business is like, can I sustainably make money off of it? And so like, you need to make sure that like, it's not just a you problem. It's not just a like, well, I think it's a problem. It really needs to come down to, are there people out there, and enough of them, who say this is a problem? And really, until you get into the shoes of the people who experience that problem deeply, you're never really going to know. But it's kind of a chicken and the egg kind of a thing, but absolutely everything he said.
Awesome. And we've got 2 minutes left. Any other questions for the panelists? Yes?
For startups interested in integrating AI and ML, what's AWS services do you recommend for streamlining model development?
What was the last part?
For streamlining model development.
Yeah, AWS SageMaker. Amazon SageMaker is the place to start. We also have Bedrock. I'm happy to talk for hours about the tech stacks, and I could list off all these services. Those are two great places to start. Bedrock is going to allow you to take additional foundational models that we've got listed on there, and you can choose the best one for your use case and not have to worry about the underlying hosting, scaling, those sort of issues, as well as we bring that model to your data rather than taking your data to the model. So from that perspective, it would stay secure and isolated within your own environment. I love the tech question, though. That's great.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like the only panel of the day that we didn't talk about AI.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. All right. Thanks, everyone. Much appreciated.